I might as well start. What's the session? Oh, this. As editors, we're here to make sure the text doesn't look sloppy or uneducated. We're expected to uphold standards of good grammar and, no matter what the text, keep it from using bad English. Right? Frankly, sometimes we shouldn't give a damn. And, more importantly, sometimes we should give a damn. And a shit. And a colloquialism. And maybe even a grammatical error. Really? Yes. Our job is to make sure that the English in the document is appropriate, certainly. But there's a difference between bad English and inappropriate English. English that is too informal is inappropriate in many places, but English that is too formal is inappropriate in many others. What we want to do is this. Make sure the text produces the right effect on the intended audience. So speaking of that, I want to make sure that everybody in the audience here is okay with about half an hour or a little more in my doing a little bit on swear words. If swear words bother you, I want to make sure that you know that that's coming, because I don't want a mismatch between effect and audience. Also, if you were hoping for all swears all the time from start to finish, sorry to disappoint you, here's your half-hour nap. Let's start by looking at a classic example of grammatical rectitude at the expense of effectiveness. An errantly silly little article published in People magazine, I know, right? Looking at grammar errors found by running 50 Shades of Grey through an electronic grammar checker that, I'm not going to name it, it currently promotes itself very heavily. Nearly all of their objections were silly. Some were flat wrong. I will look at just a couple now. I open my eyes and I'm draped in Christian grey. I open my eyes and I am draped in Christian grey. No, they're not picking on the and in place of, say, when I open my eyes I am, etc. No. Apparently, contractions are just too informal. Too informal for what? This book is what has generally been referred to as pornography. You want the brown paper package to have a bow tie on it? He really wants this. No. He really wants this. Extra words add unnecessary length to your writing. Yes, that's right. In the world of these people, really, far from being an expression of the eager emphasis of a young narrator, is just an overly wordy way of saying really. But wait, some people will tell you to leave out really because it doesn't really add anything. I mean, it doesn't add anything. So, really, actually, she just wanted to say, he wants this. Boy, now that we have stripped the character's voice out, we can get down to the true version of 50 Shades, which sounds like two computers talking to each other. 50 Shades of Annual Report. Actually, I'll get back to using bad English even in annual reports. He is totally beguiling and I'm bewitched. No. He is totally beguiling and he has bewitched me. Do I really need to say anything here? The passive voice is not a grammatical error. I might add that the repetitious structure of the altered version is often counseled against too, but some people think the passive voice is, in all instances, bad English. Okay, lesson number 1 in when to use bad English. Use bad English when it's not bad English. Pay attention to the style and effectiveness of the writing, of course. We hope you have an ear for voice, but don't pick on things for being wrong when they're not. Now, why do we say things? Why do we write things? Is it just to show people that we know the rules? I suppose for some of us it is. Is all written text simply an enormous spelling bee? Of course not. Looks at Mary Norris. You use language to produce a specific effect on a specific audience. Your job as an editor or writer is to make sure that it produces that effect as well as possible without producing bad effects that undermine it. Don't choose words that make people snicker or think of unpleasant things. Look for the SQ of the text. That's the snicker quotient, the likelihood that it's going to make people go. Don't say things in ways that will irritate your audience. I mean, unless that's your intention, but probably it's not. But also make sure you know who your most important audience are. Your audience is very seldom composed principally of other editors or, worse, grammar pedants. Everybody has ideas about grammar and expectations of it, of course, and sloppiness will usually show badly. But there are some little things that a small set of the population will notice and may become very exercised about that other people will not notice at all. These are what we call dog whistles. Beware of dog whistles. Don't center your edits on things that can only be perceived by an in-group set if that set isn't who you're selling to. In fact, some of those little details that will win you the everlasting friendship of the picky set, at least until you make your next error, will make your content stiff or unnatural to the people you're actually trying to reach. On the other hand, you can use dog whistles to your advantage to target a specified group. Choices of vocabulary, for instance. One that I discovered, if you want to get evangelical Christians energized, you might have success with the word integrous, which may not strike you as a viable word, but which turns out to be in regular use among some sets of evangelical Christians. If you're aiming at an audience of internal medicine doctors, be aware that gut is a standard term among them. They don't see it as less precise or more casual than stomach or intestines. In fact, it's a specifically defined term that covers more than either stomach or intestines. So don't just go with your gut feeling, I guess, about it if you haven't developed an ear for the idiom. But it's not just audience. The same people will expect different language in different places, obviously. Do you expect the same language in an instruction manual as in a novel? Well, I mean, I guess some people do, but different kinds of texts belong to different genres, which have different expectations for vocabulary, syntactic tendencies, and structure. And even within the same kind of text, you can have different registers, tone appropriate to different attitude towards the content, the audience, and the situation. Now, it just happens that a linguist named Douglas Biber has done a splendid amount of detailed research on the grammar used in different genres and registers. It turns out that while there are some genres you can't do with bad English, there are some you almost can't do without bad English. I'm going to look at just one of the several dimensions that he's found are factors in differentiating these styles. This dimension relates pretty directly with formality. The more involved you are, the more engaged, less cool and withdrawn and abstracted, and the more you tend to use certain grammatical terms, and the less you tend to use others. Here's the complete set. Well, here's the top half of his set. Here's me drinking coffee while you look at it for a moment. I'm not going to go over it all. I'm going to point out a few key factors in signaling that what you're saying or writing is relatively involved. Private verbs. Private verbs are way up at the top there, and they are verbs like assume, believe, doubt, and know. They're things that happen privately in your head. They're the number one signal that you're personally involved, reasonably enough. But dropping that in relative clauses and using contractions are the next two most important details, and they signal an informal approach to grammar, relatively speaking. They show involvement even more than present tense verbs do. You will notice that be as the main verb is also positively weighted. It's not an error, of course, but it's something that you may well learn to avoid in writing and editing. You know, you go bee hunting, you don't have, well, he is this, or she is that, or is past participle. It's a thing that can be a lead weight on your prose, but when you're talking about personal experience, you use it and it makes it more involved. Further down, but still positively weighted, are sentence final prepositions. Just something you're going to have to put up with. What are characteristics of uninvolved, heavily informational types of communication? Lots of nouns, prepositions, and long words. Everything, in fact, that signals that you are doing a formal scientific academic paper. The consideration of the details was performed by, etc. I'm willing to bet that most of you already have something of an intuitive feel for this distinction and how to maintain it. Well, now you have scientific support for it. But what kinds of texts are more involved and what are more informational? Biber studied that too, and it may be hard to read, so I'm going to shout some of them out. The all-cap ones are spoken and the italic ones are written. So, telephone conversations and face-to-face conversations, spontaneous speeches and public conversations, those are all naturally spoken and they are all quite involved. The most involved written stuff is personal letters. The most informational is official documents. Then academic prose, press reportage, press reviews, biographies, and then you get into all this fiction. You can see, reasonably enough, the more involved types are spoken, spontaneous, and personal. Remember this because sometimes you want a text to be spontaneous and personal, and you can cue that with a tendency to use these features. Remember this because if you're dealing with fiction, a character who talks like an essay may not be as engaging and believable to the reader as one who talks like, well, talk. And that's not just sentence length, it's use of more or less formal and impersonal grammatical features. Remember this because you can use just a few tweaks to make a character seem oddly formal or distant. Different genres of fiction fall in a reasonably unsurprising way on this scale. Romance is most involved, then mystery and adventure, science fiction a little less so. But press reportage is among the least involved. You might think newspapers are meant to be engaging and readable. Well, they're striving to seem impartial and objective. So news articles are not the place to use bad English. Sorry. Use bad English to set the tone. Let's have a look at how we might change a bit of text just by tweaking a few grammatical parameters. I think you'll be a fun person to work with. Private verb, think. Dropped relative, there's no that. B, sentence final preposition. A couple of lexical changes. We move from fun to enjoyable. We remove the private verb. You will be an enjoyable person with whom to work. Not sure I can say the same. A much more uninvolved and formal style. The enjoyment of working with you will be considerable for me. Obviously, this is not just formal, it's bloated. I'm not going to advocate using this kind of sentence even in dry technical texts, unless you're writing it and you're going to pay me to remove it from the text for you, then go ahead, because the more you do it, the more I get paid, right? Unless I'm quoting by the job, in which don't. Going by the hour, definitely. Of course, you can rewrite that more economically. I will enjoy working with you. I see I already advanced to that, sorry. I know I'll enjoy working with you. More affirmative, of course. I know, but also more involved and friendly. Do these also seem like things that different characters might say in a work of fiction? Indeed so. In fact, they can even be things that the same character would say in different contexts. After all, we choose our registers according to situation. You remember the 50 Shades of Grey advice, right? Use bad English to express character and situation. You might recognize this opening line from a novel. You don't know about me without you have read a book by the name of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, but that ain't no matter. Some people might feel that this is a dreadful and particular ought not to be read by impressionable youth, and would rather see something more like this. You do not know about me unless you have read a book by the name of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, but that is no matter. Of course, that don't sound like Huckleberry Finn. Mark Twain gave a particularly good explanatory note in the front of the book. In this book, a number of dialects are used, to wit, the Missouri Negro dialect, the extremist form of the backwoods Southwestern dialect, the ordinary Pike County dialect, and 4 modified varieties of this last. The shadings have not been done in a haphazard fashion or by guesswork, but painstakingly and with the trustworthy guidance and support of personal familiarity with these several forms of speech. I make this explanation for the reason that without it, many readers would suppose that all these characters were trying to talk alike and not succeeding. And there is another point. Characters use non-standard grammar, but they don't all use the same non-standard grammar. Even those who speak the same dialect may use different turns of phrase. I'm going to get back to this later on when we talk about rude language. We'll get to it. You can also establish character in places other than fiction. For instance, while finger-licking good is catchy, finger-licking good is catchier because it expresses a folksy country character or something. It also catches your attention more. And that's a big thing. Use bad English to get attention. An article from a few years ago by Evan LePage lists lessons from 5 of the most effective marketing campaigns of the preceding decade. The full list of lessons is as follows. You can't use all of them. You can't use bad language to accomplish all of them, but 1, be memorable, definitely. 2, make your audience a part of the campaign, possibly, depending on your audience. 3, distinguish your brand, maybe. 4, know your audience, as we said. 5, use humor. 6, take risks. 7, play to people's emotions. People have feelings about good and bad English. 8, don't be afraid to put your product on the sidelines. Not so much. 9, support a meaningful cause. Not so much. 10, try to start a movement. Well, I guess if it's a movement of bad language. But the point is that about half of these can be accomplished in part by using non-standard grammar. So the 5 campaigns that were most successful, 3 of them used bad English, or at least English that some people would pick at or find a bit naughty. They were, the man your man could smell like, our blades are ingrate, and ship my pants. The other 2 were WestJet's real-time giving and always is hashtag like a girl. So it's not that bad English was solely responsible for the success of the campaigns. Dollar Shave Club and Kmart still needed good value propositions to follow up on their barely hidden attention-getting crudities. And the Old Spice commercials relied on incredibly clever scripting and production, and Isaiah Mustafa, who, come on. But picture even him saying, the man like whom your man could smell. The man whose smell your man smell could resemble. Could that spicy beefcake make, even that spicy beefcake make those engaging? Let's face it, some of these purported rules of good English can do a lot of damage. But they do have one use. You can use them if you want to present someone as sounding starchy or priggish. Does that sound harsh? Let me show you some suggested replacements for well-known advertising slogans. These are from the website of a young priest, as they do, whose parents both happens to be very fussy about grammar. The priest in question, who goes by Father Tim, is not advocating a grammar crusade. He's more just musing out loud about how advertising plays fast and loose with the rules of grammar. So, here we go. Winston's taste good as a cigarette should. Let go of my ego. Do you have milk? Eat freshly. Think differently. I am loving it. We have that. Do you really think they would have sold nearly as well if they sounded like the counsel of an English teacher who may or may not be a robot interstellar officer? People buy consumer goods to cut loose and get away from their stuffy teachers. Come on. Why, that class, I need to go out and buy something that's going to damage my health. Come on, let's go. Winston's are cigarettes, and they're good-tasting cigarettes for working men, not some skinny things smoked by people who hold their cigarettes. So if you've ever watched Sergei Eisenstein in some of his movies, he was a Russian film director, and he made a distinction. All the working class men, actually I had it backwards. The rich people held their cigarettes this way, and the working class men held their cigarettes this way, and it was a consistent thing. But everybody holds their cigarettes this way, except for that most people don't hold cigarettes. Never mind. The ego revision would have killed the rhyme, and the fun, and probably the waffle too. Got is a fun, folksy word. Now, got can be good English, though there are some people who don't think so. There are literally people who have turned people down for contracts because they used got in their proposal. Well, anyway. But to use got as a present tense replacement for have is non-standard. But milk, Staples, and also McDonald's all bring in the youthful character, the sense of fun and readiness. The Apple slogan works in part because it's different. Just incidentally, though, you can say, want a new color for your kitchen? Think green. It therefore follows that you can also say, think different with different as an adjectival complement of think. Yes, you can. As to Subway, eat fresh is also an adjectival complement. How exactly do you eat freshly? Hey, sailor, munch, munch. I mean, you don't, and that's not what they want. They want you to eat fresh things. They want brisk, they want a crisp rhythm. Yet there's another reason to use bad English. For the sake of the sound. When Gene Roddenberry wrote, "To boldly go where no man has gone before," he provoked the displeasure of that set of people who object to what they call split infinitives, which, by the way, is an inaccurate term, but I'm not going to digress right now. You can go to my blog and find out about that. Sesquiotic.com. Sorry, I don't usually have to type it in. It's on the back of my books, too. I have books. Roddenberry knew well enough that many respected authors had split infinitives before, and that moreover they were common in everyday usage, but he could as easily have moved the boldly, right? Well, listen. To go boldly where no man has gone before. What? To go boldly? No, it stumbles. An iamb before a trochee? Look, as written, it's to boldly go where no man has gone before. It has O's on all the stressed syllables. I mean, so does the non-splitting version, but that rhythm, it makes me want to cough. To go boldly. Look, grammar, in spite of when it apparently many people feel or think, grammar is not a moral code handed down by an ancient deity on stone tablets. We know perfectly well it was handed down by a modern deity named Benjamin Dreyer in a book. We want to produce the best effect possible for the desired audience, and rhythm and assonance come into that. Got milk? Eat fresh. Lego my ego. We also have to remember that the desired audience is usually not the "it is I" crowd. Watch your dog whistles. If you want people to be comfortable with what you're saying, use language that they're comfortable with. In fact, use language that is pointedly like the kind their teachers slap their wrists for. Ideas of correct English are very much about class. I wrote an article that's on bbc.com about that. People who use bad English are not our sort, dear. But who's your audience? Just folks. You don't get linen tablecloths and 10-piece place settings at family restaurants, let alone McDonald's. If people can win elections because they're just ordinary folks, you can certainly win over many audiences by being ordinary folks. Remember, pointedly formal grammar reminds people of their English teachers And for many people in your audience, those aren't fond memories. Reading "know to whom you are speaking" rather than know who you're speaking to is like coming into someone's living room and finding plastic covers on all the furniture. And I might add that correcting somebody on a detail like that is coming into their living room and putting plastic covers on their furniture. Things that are too perfect also aren't as inviting. I mean, really messy stuff is no good either, to be sure, but consider, no one wants to be the first person to cut into a perfect cake, or a nice new round of cheese. This is a service that I have to provide when I go places, is to make sure that I'm the first one to eat it, because I am dead certain that other people will stand around feeling bad about it. I don't feel bad. I also eat the last piece, same reason. When I worked in a bookstore, I found that while you wanted to have your shelves tidy, you wanted your bargain book displays to be a bit messy. A perfect display is like a museum piece. If you pull a few books out and leave them lying around loosely, people will start picking things up and looking at them. Partly, in fact, out of a sense of order. But it draws the attention. It's no longer a wall of books that you stand back and admire. So too with your grammar. Within reason, slight imperfections can be more inviting. Also, consider restaurant menus. We have all gone into restaurants and looked at the menus and found spelling and grammar errors. Cheap family restaurants have them. Expensive high-end restaurants have them. Everyone has them. Almost everyone. If you're in a restaurant and the menu is completely perfect, no errors of syntax, spelling, or punctuation, this is because they have hired someone, possibly someone in this room at this moment, to tidy it up. Well, who can afford to do that? Big corporate chains, of course. If you're in a restaurant and the menu has an error or two, that's a little sign, even if it's unconsciously received, that the restaurant is not a glossy, big, perfect corporate place. It's a badge of honesty or something. I mean, it's all perception. People love authenticity. I have words to say about the idea of authenticity. I'm not going to give them to you right now. Now, I'm not telling you to go putting errors in menus or other things just to make them feel more folksy and honest. First of all, because you're literally being paid to do the opposite. And some people will think if the spelling is sloppy, the food must be too. That is a perfect non sequitur. Cooking and spelling are unrelated activities, and in my experience, most cooks don't focus much on correct spelling. I will tell you, though, if you find any spelling errors in either of my cookbooks, yes, we'll say including volume 1 and 2, they're intentional. Be aware that too perfect English can seem uninviting or dishonest in some contexts, and you want to be believable. This is also why sometimes you should talk about free gifts or use a bit of jargon. You're going to be more believable if you use in-group vocabulary to emphasize your credibility. I mean, I already mentioned this in the to be like normal folks bit, but sometimes you want to be like abnormal folks. I want to quote from Robert Bly's Secrets of a Freelance Writer. Every business text warns us to avoid jargon and write in plain, simple terms. But jargon, if properly applied, can make copy more effective. The most common exception to the avoid jargon rule is copy aimed at special audiences: farmers, chemists, architects, warehouse managers. Jargon can strengthen your link to these specialists because it shows them that you are in the know, that you understand their business and empathize with their problems. A spoonful of bitter helps the medicine taste like medicine. This also comes in with slang. If you're addressing teenagers, you want to use the kind of slang they use, whichever subgroup of teenagers you're aiming at. And of course, they will have crafted this slang specifically to make sure that you don't know it. And you have to get it right. Best to have it vetted by actual teenagers of the sort you want to reach, who you can trust not to dick you over. This is also true for adults who belong to certain enthusiasm groups, role-playing games, for instance. There's another reason to use jargon, just to quote Bob Bly again. Jargon sometimes can make a product seem more impressive or more valuable. Listerine, we are told, is the only mouthwash that kills halitosis. Sounds impressive until you realize that halitosis is a word concocted by the Listerine people to sell more mouthwash. It sounds technical, so it must be authoritative. And redundancy, free gift. Also, one more quote from Bly. Any English teacher can tell you that free gift is a redundancy because a gift, by definition, is free. But the copywriter's job is to sell, not to write compositions for an English class. And as a copywriter, you realize that the consumer's natural reaction is to think that the gift comes with strings attached. So you add the word free to emphasize that there are no strings attached. Ha 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 ha. That the gift is indeed just that, a gift. Ha 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 ha. Sometimes a redundancy presses the point better and makes it more likely to be believed. And they won't mistake your meaning if you say something twice, which leads to the next reason to use bad English. To be clear. Just going to clear my throat. You don't have to use the nuclear option, but sometimes you have to use the nuclear option. There's also the case where your audience isn't really used to the technically correct way, and if you use it, they may actually misunderstand it. Consider that you're not supposed to stick a colon in the middle of a clause. Well and good, but it also follows from that, as I think we all know, that if you're introducing a list like the following, you're not supposed to use a colon. The problem being that many readers might think the sentence before the list has ended or dropped off if they're not used to that convention. A lot of readers are very, very, very used to having colons in those places. You have to consider, where is the pain greater? Is the pain from breaking a rule that you hold dear to your heart greater than the pain of not communicating correctly to some of your audience? Readers just want them, and if they're not used to the official rules, adhering to them may throw them off in some cases. Does that really hurt so badly? Incidentally, using numerals for numbers below 10 isn't strictly speaking bad English, but it does go against standard style recommendations, as does using numerals at the start of a sentence. But in some kinds of materials, you can really fight the reader, or at least make it less usable, if you don't stick consistently to numerals all the time in every place. One of my bugbears is the disruptive effect of insistence on spelling out numbers at the beginning of sentences in all circumstances. That's distracting. But it can be even worse if people are using a document for reference to look up important information, because numerals jump off the page and spelled out numbers don't. I spent years and years and years filling my day editing reference information material for people on websites. And believe me, we were very sensitive to this. Take 6 to 12 tablets with water per day. Okay, so they may see and read the 6, but the 12 will catch them sooner and stay with them better. And if they're just scanning down it, they will see the 12, especially if it's using a typeface that has full height 12 as opposed to the old style figures that for some perverse reason I have chosen a font with. So, use bad English for usability. I'd like to compare the rules of grammar to the rules of the road. We know what the formal rules are. We also know what rules our audience will actually abide by. I'm put in mind of a poem I read once. Here lies Rupert P. McRae, who died defending his right-of-way. He was right, dead right, as he sped along, but he's just as dead as if he were wrong. There's no point in adhering to rules that conflict with what your readers expect unless you're teaching them the rules. And even then, consider the aims and results carefully. Speaking of consider the results, which is a classic piece of advice from Niccolo Machiavelli, he didn't say the ends justify the means. He said, si guarda al fine, consider the results, which doesn't mean the same thing, because if you say the ends justify the means, then you're saying, well, I've got a good end and I will do whatever and I can stomp out. Well, no, because you're going to do a lot of damage and that's going to come back and cause trouble. So anyway, here's another little tip I want to slip in. This may or may not come in handy to you, but I discovered it in graduate school. If you're up for, say, your doctorate, as one does, and you're bringing your dissertation to defense, this also works with masters, those guys on the committee are going to want to find something to pick on. There's a 0% chance they'll say, well, this is all great, no issues, you're good. Not going to happen. They look like they weren't doing their job. So my advice to doctoral students is to skip that very last proofing pass. Give them something to pick at. If you're sure that all your facts are in order and you've already read over it a dozen times, skip that last check for typos. This hurts, I know, but it'll hurt more if they ask for bigger corrections instead. Look, there will be a few typos. There are always a few typos. If your committee finds them and picks on them, they won't need to go looking for other things to pick on. Of course, if your dissertation is full of other mistakes, well, that's kind of your problem there. And no number of typos is going to fix that. But people will leap with alacrity on obvious mechanical errors and will sometimes also overlook more important errors as they do. So, in some circumstances, if you want to be devious, use it as a red herring. I am entirely sure that some politicians do this. I mean, I'm sure that some of them do it without thinking or trying, but I'm sure that some of them do it quite intentionally. I'm not going to speculate who does which. In fact, I'm not going to start talking about names of politicians because my face is already red enough. By the way, this is because I was skiing in Stowe for 2 days. It has nothing to do with how much I drank last night. Okay. Using bad English as a red herring has its risks, of course. If you use bad English, people may conclude that you're stupid, and therefore that whatever you say must be wrong. It has been demonstrated that you can make people really impressed with a really vapid point if you frame it in really, really nice English, and at the same time you can make a really good point and people will ignore it because it seems too plain. In medical writing, you have to throw in a bit of jargon or they just won't take it seriously. People give more credit for fact value to fancier English, and that's one of the things that we here in this room generally sell. Pay us, we're going to make you more believable. But people will give more credit for honesty to plain English, to people who are just folks. We may not like this, but we should at least be honest with ourselves about it. And sometimes they'll just enjoy the bad English. Breaking rules can be fun. Do it for, I don't know if this is a universal term, but where I'm from, doing something for shits and giggles involves real giggles, but not actual real shits. Usually. Sometimes people break rules not because they don't know the rules, but just because reasons. I can has correct grammars, please? Such correct, very grammar, wow. Play with grammar has always been a thing some people like to do for fun, but some turns of phrase really push against the norms. Are the people who pass memes around ignorant of the rules? If they were, the fun would be lost. These usages may seem faddish. In fact, several of these are already past their sell-by dates. I believe I had to blow the dust off one of them before I could use it. But you can use references to them for good effect. Changing I can has cheeseburger to may I have a cheeseburger loses the reference, loses the reverse prestige, loses the fun, loses te kitty. And speaking of reverse prestige, vulgarity can be very effective. Whether Gone with the Wind's writer and producers intended it or not, Rhett Butler's closing, I don't give a damn, was a solid slap in the face that caught attention for its crudeness. Now, it wasn't the first use of damn in a movie. In fact, it wasn't even the first use of damn in that movie. Damn Yankees is heard earlier on, but it was a highlighted moment. It was like a verbal, oh, shouldn't have done that, verbal slap in the face for the audience too. Vulgarity is, of course, much more accepted today. There are articles on some websites that seem to require an F word at least once per paragraph, almost as a form of punctuation. And even mainstream publications use them freely in quoted material and sometimes in personal essays. But too much wears down the effect. It's just like capitalizing every word. Why would you do that? I like to think of a rather proper lady I knew in high school who was always well-spoken and polite. She was as much of a patrician as you can get. in Canada. She was a member of the IODE, which means that her ancestors were among the first Anglophones to come over to Canada because they wanted to stay loyal to the British Crown instead of, being Americans. So anyway, one time I had bought a new backpack and I was showing it to her proudly, and I said it was really good. And she said, "Yes, damn good." I've never forgotten that. There is indeed a concept of the well-placed vulgarity, a little hot pepper in just the right spot in the dish, a brief flambé perhaps, rattling the listener, awakening, arousing, whatever. Connecting directly to the emotions. Vulgarities do that. It's been demonstrated. They connect more directly to the limbic system. I believe we have an article or two on that on Strong Language. By the way, Strong Language is a group blog that Stan Carey and I started and that has contributed to by many people, some of whom even in this room as we speak, we being me. And it is a sweary blog about swear words. So it's fun, it's fascinating, it's for the whole family except for those in the family who don't use the F word. Vulgarities connect more directly to the limbic system. Play it for contrast and you dip quickly into the special reserves and the effect is like lightning. You put all your money in it. Well then, I believe you're quite fucked. Would you like some tea? Of course, you can't use the really strong words just anywhere. You are unlikely to see shit or asshole in an annual report, however accurate it might be. But you may well see damn the torpedoes in a call-out. And of course, you can use vulgarity to emphasize a disruption, a faux pas, a slip, like Eliza Doolittle's "not bloody likely" in Pygmalion and My Fair Lady. This can work in quoting and reportage, and of course it can work in fiction. And if you're dealing with fiction, here are 3 great tips from romance writer and freelance editor K.J. Charles. I'm going to quote her at length here because I really can't say it better myself. Ask yourself why your character swears. Is their swearing mostly sexual or religious, specifically abusive, or just verbal decoration? Consider where they get their swears from. Army past, foreign travels. What about their social class? Does someone who normally swears like a bastard mind their language around just one person, or vice versa? Can you use an inadvertent ejaculation, snicker quotient, to betray your character's shock or anger? And at what level of extremity will that kick in? Know your registers. A Regency heroine cannot toss damn about in public. Bloody obeys grammatical rules and cannot bloody just bloody be drop bloody randomly bloody into a bloody sentence to convey bloody Britishness. I added the bloody, sorry. Consider context. What impact does each swear have on the people around them? If swearing is routine and similar among a variety of characters, that can be very boring. Before you create a register in which, as Anthony Bourdain puts it, fuck is used principally as a comma, ask yourself how you're going to escalate when people are really cross. One more thing. Vulgarity is an in-group thing. Reverse prestige. It can be a badge of membership for a social set, or it can be a fun transgression. Here's a little social media tip. Okay, so in 2015, we set up Strong Language, and we tweet about it, and one or more of us might have been worried about losing Twitter followers from using vulgarities in our tweets about it. What we found was what your junior high school teachers told you was true. The F word really is the 4-letter friend getter. Somehow your junior high school teacher thought it was bad to have friends, which is probably why you don't want to stick closely to your junior high school teacher's grammar advice either, because you want friends. Well, there you go. 4-letter Twitter follower getter too. So do we have all that? I'm going to do a review here of the reasons to use bad English. Some of them overlap. You may object that I've made the same point several times from different angles, and if you do, fuck you, you're right. Repetition can come in handy. I said that. Okay. Use bad English when it's not bad English to set the tone, to express character and situation, and that's not just in novel. The character can be the character of the voice of the product. It can even suggest the character of the reader. To get attention, to preserve the sound, to be like normal folks, to be invited, Invited too, come to think of it. To be believable, to be clear, for usability, to give people something to pick at. So I didn't say it before, another great story that somebody told me was the rule of the six-fingered man. If you're painting, if you're a commercial artist and you're painting like crowd scenes or something, always include a sixth finger on someone so that the client can be like, oh, fix that sixth finger, what are you doing? Otherwise, they'll probably ask for a correction that will involve a lot more work. It's just the same rule as I said for the grammatical error on your dissertation. You really have to play head games with some clients. I'm sure you all know this. As a red herring, for shits and giggles and shits and shits and shits. For a slap in the face, not going to demonstrate. For the well-placed vulgarity and to get friends and readers. Oh, and one more thing. Oh, I forgot to advance. Shit. Use bad English only when you're sure you'll get away with it. As Machiavelli said, consider the results. All right. We have enough time for a few questions, comments, or shouts of abuse. And then after that, if anybody wants any of my books, Songs of Love and Grammar. I met a buxom grammatician and said I'd like her out to take. Back she came with proposition in Let's Stay and Out Let's Make. Confessions of a Wordlush and 2 volumes of The Asshole's Guide to Cooking. By the way, you can still use that cookbook even if you're not an asshole. I'm the asshole, it's okay. Any questions, thoughts, comments? I'm just going to drink coffee until,
So I just posted a few of these on my Facebook because when I'm not copy editing for modern genres, I teach first year writing at the college level. So I had to put a PS. Dear students, this does not apply to first year college writing.
Yep. A thing that I didn't say but probably should have is, in order to break the rules well, you have to know what the damn rules are. Of course you do. I remember when I was in junior high school and gym class, and we were doing this sort of gymnastics show for like the school concert. I said, well, I want to be the gymnastics clown. I don't want to do the normal boring crap that other people do, partly because I was actually terrified of doing backward rolls and breaking my neck, but I didn't say that. But anyway, the teacher said, look, if you're going to be a clown, you have to be better at it than everybody else, or you're going to hurt yourself and possibly somebody else too. And if you don't, I'll hurt you. Now, he didn't say that, but it was understood. You have to know the rules before you can break them. So it's very important to learn the rules and to learn what people think are the rules and to learn why they may be wrong about it. And then to get people to pay you for that knowledge. At the back.
You said your blogs are the Sesquiotic and one called Strong Language, is that correct?
That's right. To find Sesquiotica, you can just Google my name, which is, James Harbeck. Because it turns out that Sesquiotica is an excruciatingly, extraordinarily bad bit of branding based on an abstruse pun that literally nobody gets. Okay, figuratively nobody gets. But yes, strong language, it's stronglang.wordpress.com. You'll find it. I have business cards here for anybody who wants to take a business card, would like to know my information without actually buying a book that has it on the back.
Can you put the previous slide there?
Oh, sure. Yeah, sorry about that. I am also, by the way, going to edit this and put it on YouTube. Give me a week or so. That's why that camera is there, and it's probably going to stop recording very shortly. But I'm going to cut out the questions and answers anyway, because they never really come out. But yes, it will be on YouTube.
What was the name of that linguist who did the study?
Douglas Biber, B-I-B-E-R. It's like imbiber without the im. Yeah, his work is really, really great. Actually, It was very, very useful for my master's thesis in linguistics. Very handy. I won't tell you the title of my master's thesis because I have to look it up. It's long and desperate, but it's a very interesting subject. I might present on it next year. So I won't tell you what it is. Suspense or something. Any more questions? Comments? Thank you all for being here. And if you just want to chat off the record with me afterwards, I'll be circulating.